Good morning, my dear students, and welcome back to class 1 History. Today, we are going to deal with the topic called the Industrial Revolution. So, we will see what is the origin of this particular Industrial Revolution, what was its impact, and what are the revelations that happened because of this particular Industrial Revolution. So, let's go to the background of this particular event. How did this particular Industrial Revolution happen in the world? So let's go through the background. The first thing to be kept in mind is that there was an increase in the volume of trade. So there was an increase in the trade. So what happened? More goods had to be produced. So that was the condition at that time. There was an increase in the trade. So what happened? More goods had to be produced. So what was the system that was happening at that time? The system that was happening at that time is known as a domestic system of production. This was a system that was being practiced in the world at that time. And what do you mean by the term called domestic system of production? It means the artisans buy the raw materials from the merchants and make goods using their hands and simple tools. And what was the negative side of it? What was its drawback? The drawback of this particular system was that it could not meet the demands of the market. As I said, there was an increase in the trade. So what happened? More goods had to be produced, and the system that was happening at that time was domestic system of production, which means the artisans buy the raw materials from the merchants and they make the goods how? By using hands and simple tools. And what is its drawback? It could not meet the demands of the market. So what happened? So we have the emergence of something called a factory system of production, which happened in 18th century. So what does it mean? In this particular factory system, the rich merchants set up the factories. So why did they set up the factory? Because they invented machines and they brought raw materials from the market. So once they set up the factories, they employed workers on wages, and there was this something called a machine made goods. So that is a thing called a factory system of production, in which the rich merchants set up the factories, they invented the machines and bought the raw materials from the market, and they employed the workers on the wages, and they made machine made goods. So that's the difference between domestic means of production and factory system of production. And why it is known as a revolution? Because there were radical changes from the domestic system of production. In domestic system what happens? The artisans buy the raw materials from the market and they make the tools, or they make the goods by using their hands and tools, simple tools. But in the factory system, the merchants set up the factories and they employ the workers on wages, and they have something called a machine made goods. Since there are radical changes from the domestic system of production, it is known as a revolution. That is why it is known as an industrial revolution. Now, why it happened in England? The industrial revolution happened in England in 18th century, and what are the reasons for it? The first reason is that England had abundant supply of raw materials, especially coal and iron. That is the first reason why industrial revolution happened in England, because England had abundant supply of raw materials, coal and iron. Second reason is that England had stable government that supported trade and commerce. So there was a stable government. The stable government means the government that was ruling continuously. There were no changes in the government, so they had stable government that also supported trade and commerce. Next thing is that abolition of serfdom left number of people free, that they moved to cities for work. Availability of cheap labor, which means the people began to move from villages to cities for work. So what happened? There was the availability of cheap labor, because there were many people who came in search of the work. So what happened? There was the availability of cheap labor. And next thing is that British government had a strong navy and policy of a geographical expansion. Their army was very strong, so they could control anything, and there was also policy of a geographical expansion, which means they were expanding their power to other parts of the world. So these are the reasons why the Industrial Revolution happened in England. So these are the 4 reasons: the abundant supply of raw materials, the stable government that supported the trade and commerce, and the availability of cheap labor, and the British government had a strong navy and their policy of geographical expansion. And what are the reasons for it? The geographical expansion led to colonization and availability of raw materials at cheap rate. Once the people found new sea routes, what happened? There was a geographical expansion that led to colonization. It means the European countries began to have colonies in Africa and Asia. That led to the availability of raw materials at cheap rate. Second thing is that colonies became market for them to dump the finished products. What happened? England or the European countries will come to Asia and Africa, their colonies, collect all the raw materials, and they go back to their country and they make all the goods, and they just come and dump it in this particular colony, or these colonies became market for them to dump all the finished products. Next thing is the atmosphere of scientific inquiry and improvement of a transport system. There was something called atmosphere of scientific inquiry. The people had the tendency, or the people were interested in science, and also there was something called improved transport system. So these are the reasons. These are the reasons that you must keep in mind. The reasons that led to something called the Industrial Revolution. Next thing what you are going to learn, what are the inventions that happened at that time. We have the spinning jenny, water frame, spinning mule, power loom, flying shuttle, steam engine, steam powered locomotive. So these are the inventions that happened that led to the Industrial Revolution in England. So remember some of the inventions and some of the persons who invented all these items. So just remember the names there. And there are 2 more things to be learned. One is something called a seed drill. And what does it mean? It is a mechanical seeder that allowed seeds to be planted easily deep into the earth. Which means the people did not have to spend their time to put the seed. There was something called a seed drill that allowed the seeds to be planted easily deep into the earth. Next one is horse sow, which means it is a horse-drawn machine that loosened the soil and killed weeds. So these are the 2 things that made the life of people easy and comfortable. And better coal mining facilities and techniques. So that also helped, or that also came up because of this particular Industrial Revolution. So these are the things that you must keep in mind with regard to the Industrial Revolution. So remember the things that led to the growth of Industrial Revolution. What were the reasons? Remember the domestic system of production and the factory system of production. Understand the differences between these 2. Then we have why the Industrial Revolution happened in England, the reasons for it. The impact or the things that happened because of this particular Industrial Revolution, and the major inventions that happened in the world at that time. Remember 1 or 2 names and the people who invented these inventions. And remember the last point, the seed drill and the horse sow, and the facilities that happened that entered into the world because of this particular Industrial Revolution. And next topic is the impact of the Industrial Revolution that you will go through in the next class. So go through this video once again and try to understand the explanation. Thank you.